Hey everyone, welcome to episode 21 of the Fisheries podcast with Dr Tom Pickerell. Tom is currently the Global Tuna Director at the Sustainable Fisheries Partnership. We met a few years ago when he was working at Seafish as a technical director, and we ended up working closely on the Enjoy Fish and Chips campaign in 2015-16, which was probably the biggest nutritional study on fish and chips. Tom's position now is advising very large retail companies on most topics covering tuna. In this episode, we discuss outrageous claims about seafood being off the menu by 2050. We talk about everything seafood in general, but also the eating habits of fish in the UK, ethics of farm fish, we touch on Brexit a little bit, and so much more. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and be sure to share it with anyone who's interested in fish and seafood and the issues that come along with it. So, Tom Pickerell, thank you for your time today, but I am going to call you Dr. Tom. So, if you could tell us a little bit about what you do.
Yeah, certainly. Well, thank you very much for inviting me to join the podcast.
That's nothing at all.
So, I'm the Global Tuna Director at Sustainable Fisheries Partnership, or SFP as it's known. SFP is an international NGO that works with companies such as Asda, Walmart, McDonald's, Disney, etc., to provide them seafood sustainability advice, recommendations, and then we also work with their suppliers to implement those changes.
Yeah. And what does the day-to-day involve?
The day-to-day is pretty varied, depending on what's happening, but I focus entirely on tuna, both fresh and frozen, and shelf-stable, which is the canned or pouches. So it depends what's really happening. There's a number of different meetings around the year which are important that we are involved in, so that would happen in like late May, early June. There's another one that's just happened. There's one in November, then December. So they're the kind of the big ones. We've also got the seafood shows that we go to, send out newsletters to the companies that we work with, update them on what's happening, provide advice. I mean, yesterday I was at a retailer's providing them advice on their sourcing policy. Okay. Last week I was at another retailer. So it's very varied.
So you're sort of guiding change, essentially. You know, whether it's sustainability or whatever, you're sort of helping these companies do things better in some ways.
Yeah, we focus entirely on environmental sustainability. Yeah.
Okay, so when we first met, you was the technical director at Seafish. So I knew that you don't mind, a bit of a challenge and a challenging conversation. So I've got loads of topics here. But I think when we first met, I think one of the issues I had was that, well, not I had, but I thought was an issue, is that we didn't really know a lot about like nutritional information about fish and chips. And I think that I came to you, I got told to come to you. I think it was Nicky Hawkins said, go see Tom. And then we did the sort of, what was it called? The National Fish and Chip Nutrition Study or campaign or?
Yeah, something like that.
I can't remember what the official name was, but it was quite an interesting one. Thousands of products got tested and it's still out there now for anybody who wants to find it. I'll find the website and put it in the show notes. But Tom was the guy that essentially made that happen at Seafish. So I thank you for that.
No, it was a fantastic project, working with some very, very brilliant people. Got to know the guys at the NFFF, really motivated. Learned a lot about the fish and chip sector that I knew nothing about at all. Learned how to batter fish at their training facilities, which it was a lot more in-depth than I thought, and it certainly made me a bit more of a fish and chip snob now.
It should do.
Yeah, I mean, you really realise the difference in quality now. So, yeah, it was a fantastic project. I mean, we, as you say, we did 1,000-odd samples to get both the portion sizes, which was a big thing that the Federation and the fish and chip sector was asking us about. Was, in the face of challenges to takeaway sizes, could we get in front of that and produce some recommendations on portion sizes? And I think one of the big conclusions to me is that the portion sizes of fish and chips on average in the UK were enormous, way more than what would be considered sort of normal or aligned with the recommendations for portion sizes. And the recommendation was, don't bin them, but just call them what they are. If you sell in huge portions, call them extra large and maybe offer a smaller portion. and did some analysis on that it could actually be better for the business, it would
Yeah.
attract more customers. We did consumer surveys. And as you said, we also did nutritional analysis of a huge matrix of different options in different frying mediums, different types of flow rate in the batter, different potatoes. And it was a really good project. And as you say, the information is there. We did some press on it. That was the only disappointing aspect, was the Daily Mail, I think it was, nanny state tells you to reduce the size of your fish and chips. It was exactly the opposite, but that's them.
Maybe that was the beginning of this clickbait culture. Just put this big, huge statement out there. But no, we're just asking for normal sizes, not.
Yeah, if you want an enormous size,
go for it.
Buy it.
Yeah.
But be aware that it is an enormous size.
Yeah.
But there are also other sizes.
Yeah, I don't think that's ever going to happen with our industry. I don't know. Maybe it will. Maybe it won't. But it needs to. Yeah, just a bit of sensible guideline, really. I don't think anybody would want a kilo of fish and a kilo of chips. It's ridiculous. But yeah. But I thought, in all my topics, what we'll do, we'll go straight in at the deep end. Usually I try and sort of like skirt around it and then build up to it. But I think I heard something recently and I told you about it, and I thought, I texted you straight away actually when I heard about it, and I wanted your take on it. So straight into the deep end. I heard someone say recently that by 2048 there'll be no fish and seafood to eat. So what's your take on it?
Yeah, this is there's an everlasting myth that came out of a paper that was published in 2006. Made a projection that by 2048 all the fisheries in the world will be collapsed, and it was based on data, an extrapolation of stock statuses, etc. And it was accompanied by a press release, which is, at the time, was, I think, pretty unusual to have a scientific paper accompanied by a press release.
Yeah.
And what I've noticed is that's increasing now, the use of press releases that often say things that maybe are not explicitly said in the peer-reviewed paper. But regardless, it got picked up by everyone, and it was all over the news. But it was refuted by many, many experts, one of which I think there was a famous quote that said it was like a monumental act of stupidity or something like that. And there's been several papers that have since that followed up, really critiquing the methodology, the data that was used, and basically saying it's a nonsense. And interestingly enough, the original authors, or some of the original authors, the lead authors, worked with one of the critics and produced another paper that actually said, it's not as bad as this. And in fact, if you separate out the well-managed fisheries from the non-managed fisheries or the poorly managed fisheries, it's actually a different picture. And so that paper is now sort of supersedes that. But the myth will not go away. And in fact, there's been another paper I've read, a very interesting one by a guy called Trevor Branch, that looks at the citation rates of this original paper. And it's still hugely cited by people, despite being retracted. However, one of the findings he had, which I think is really interesting, is the original authors of that 2048 paper, they very rarely, in fact, only 2% of times cite their own paper. So I think they're aware that it was retracted and aware that it was challenged, but other people are still quoting it. And unfortunately, if you either don't understand it and you're quoting it because you see the headline, or you do understand it and you're quoting it for nefarious purposes.
Yeah.
And that's a real shame, because I think we've moved on. And there has been subsequent papers. I think there's a guy called Chris Costello at University of Santa Barbara has done another paper on that, which looked at well-managed fisheries. And it shows that we're actually seeing some success stories. There are a lot of challenges. But if you separate out well-managed from non-managed fisheries, it's a different picture. But when you amalgamate them all together, then it looks overall bad. So
is there quite a lot of not so well managed fisheries?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the Rebuilding Fish Stocks paper, which is the one that they worked together on afterwards, I think it was 63% of assessed fish stocks still require rebuilding. The FAO, that's the Food and Agriculture Organization, every 2 years they do a state of the world's stocks. And I can't remember the exact figures off the top of my head, but it's something like a third of the fisheries are sustainably managed. There's a load that are managed or fished at maximum sustainable levels. No, sorry, it's underexploited, fished at maximum sustainable levels, and overexploited. And one of the challenges there, another myth, is people tend to pull together the overfished and fished at maximum sustainability to give a very large figure, like 70-odd% of the world's fisheries are overfished or fished at maximum levels, and that's a false thing to say, because fished at a maximum level is not necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah, that's interesting, because there is just so many just stories out there which are just unverified, doom and gloom. But a few of them today, like doing research, and you get halfway down, you think, I've got to bin this one, because I think they're just citing studies that just are a bit naff. So I think that it'd be interesting to sort of see how that plays out over the next few years.
Well, it's a mixed bag. There's some really well managed fisheries,
but they don't get spoken about as much, do they? That press release lasts a day or two. Everything else crowds it out. Let's say if there's a good story about, I don't know, MSC something, or some responsibly sourced something, it's great for about a day.
Well, I think that's one of the problems in the media, is they like to, they'd rather print a story about a man who's lost £100 than a man who's won £1,000.
Yeah.
It's that negative side of things. If you get a fishery that has been historically bad and it recovers, then you do tend to get some good press. A great example is the North Sea cod. When it went through MSC certification, that got a lot of coverage, and well deserved, because it was in a terrible state. A lot of work was put in place. They got it to that situation where it could achieve MSC with conditions, and fantastic news for everyone concerned, and that did get some good publicity.
So I was going to talk about that later on anyway, but seeing as you brought it up, we'll just bring that to the front. It's really confusing, because a few years ago you get the good story, and then even like 8 months later I found a story 8 months after that great story, North Sea cod in trouble, etc., etc. Who do we believe in this instance?
Well, they're both true. They're both valid. So the spawning stock biomass, which is the size of what's measured as the size of the population, it exceeded the limit level, which meant it could enter MSC certification.
Okay.
It's now dropped below that. Populations fluctuate. Normally, they're managed, comprehensively managed through something called a harvest strategy, which means as the population goes up, you can increase the amount you catch, and if it goes down, you can decrease to bring it back. And that's well-managed fishery. It goes up and down.
Yeah.
When you're hovering around the limit point, then that's, there's more likelihood of it going under. And one of the conditions was to increase it, further. With the case of the North Sea, there's a number of different challenges there. It's really operating at the southern limit of the geographical distribution, and of course, with warming seas, it could be causing the populations to move north. But I personally think one of the challenges there is the discarding. There's still an awful lot of discarding going on, and that is impacting on the population. So the actual agreed levels of landings. But don't forget, the quota is about landings, not what you take from the sea. That's what they were trying to address with the landings obligation. If there still is discarding going on, then there's extra fish being taken from the population. So it's probably a combination of factors, but there is a recommendation. I think it's a 67% cut. So that needs to happen.
So that's probably it. Although it looks bad, it's actually good for the industry, because obviously it's for the future protection.
Well, that's the whole issue of sustainability, is that it's for the long-term viability of both the oceans and the businesses. No one who's involved in sustainable seafood should be anti-industry. Otherwise, they're just in conservation. But sustainable seafood is about having sustainable businesses as well. And this is what all the efforts have been, is about. Let's manage. It's always easier to manage a population or put in measures when the stock size, for example, is high, because then you can put in places where people are in a good place. When you're trying to rebuild something from a very low level, which was the case with North Sea cod or other cod populations around the UK, they're at such low levels, there's very little room to manoeuvre. And you can say, well, just shut the fishery down. Well, you could shut the fishery down and you get rebuilding very quickly. But what's going to be the social economic consequences of that? So you have to factor that in. So
if you cut the quota by 67%, roughly, how long does it take for that to rebuild? Well, in your experience,
cod is a very fecund individual. It lays millions of eggs, and it should rebuild very quickly. And in fact, you see episodes when recruitment is high, then it can rebuild very quickly. But that's also, there's a number of different factors there as well. Recruitment has to be high, and you've got to have a varied population with different sort of age structures in it. when you're at very low levels, it's very difficult to rebuild.
Yeah.
So there has to be these harsh cuts. But it came back before. We got to that level. It can happen again, but we just need to be, the fisheries need to be managed sustainably, and that requires reducing the effort.
That makes complete sense. So that does answer the question a little bit, actually, because I think especially in the fish and chip industry, people just get really confused by this constant up and down message. But actually what you're saying is they're both right, because, the update, it's just an update. It's just telling us, well, it was good last year, but now this year it's not so good. But do you think there's just too many people or boats fishing in that area for it to be, I don't know, MSC certified this year, and then for next year to be a warning? Is there just too much fishing in that respect?
Well, it's difficult. It's about effort, really. So it's not so much number of vessels. It's about how much each individual vessel fishes.
Okay.
So it has to be. This is the challenge. If you have 1,000 vessels and the size of and the pie is small, everyone's going to get a very small slice.
Yeah.
If you had 100 vessels, then and the pie is the same size. But then it's again you get back to the socioeconomic consequences, and you've got to ask yourself, what is it we want? Now, if you were a pure fisheries manager, you would probably want 100 vessels, or maybe even 10 vessels that are capturing a lot of fish, because they're easy to manage. The people involved will probably be much more likely to be fully compliant with every regulation because they've got a super profitable business there. But then, what's going to happen to the communities that support that? That's what happened in Iceland, for example. A lot of consolidation, a lot of small communities. The quota was pulled together into a smaller number of vessels.
Yeah.
And so there's something called a community quota agreement as well. It's something people discuss. Is maybe all the quotas should stick within a region so it doesn't get absorbed.
Yeah, that was something that Bobby Joyce mentioned in the podcast that we did. Seems like ages ago, but he mentioned that in the 70s there was probably triple the amount of ships in that area, and now there's probably that much less. And he was saying that there's more reason, there's more investment, because they've got a thicker slice of the wedge as opposed to before, when it was just a bit like, well, why are we putting so much effort into it? And there has been a lot of investment in that area, I suppose. But now that you sort of mentioned it as well, tell us a little bit more about discards. Because you touched on it just a bit before. It was a really big thing a few years ago. Well, remember Hugh Fearnley-Whitting's scored one of his campaigns on discards, but it just seems to carry on, and it's just not spoken about as much. What do you think that is? Yeah,
you're right. It's not. I don't think it's as mainstream as it was. As you say, a couple of years ago, Hugh did his fish fight, and he focused on discards, and he showed some pictures of vessels throwing away perfectly edible fish. There's a number of reasons why you discard. You might not have enough quota, so you have to, you're not allowed to land it by law, therefore you have to throw it away, or it's under a minimum landing size, for example. There's arguments against that, saying, well, you should be fishing more selectively to avoid that. But there's also something called high grading. It's when you catch fish, but you want to keep the bigger, more profitable ones, so you keep throwing away the stuff that's less profitable, because knowing that you can only land a certain amount. The landings obligation was meant to get rid of that. 800,000 people signed a petition that Hugh started, received a lot of publicity and traction in the EU. The commissioner at the time, Maria Damanaki, got behind it, and the landings obligation came into play 2015 with the new CFP, and it was implemented incrementally each year. So the 1st of January 2019 was when the final tranche of that came in. Yes, there's a House of Lords report that came out. It started in November, December 2018, so it was 9 months ago, looking at that. And the findings for that were not great. And they did a follow-up that started reporting in May, I think, and produced a report that came out last month. And now that report was pretty damning. It said things like... there's no evidence of some of the calamities that were predicted, such as chokes. So that would mean that I don't actually have enough quota left to go and do fishing, because I'm not allowed to throw it away, and I can't land it, so I can't go out. And a lot of people were very worried that they would be forced to tie up.
Obviously they can't throw it away, but why couldn't they land it? Just no market for it?
No, they don't have, because you don't have a quota for it.
Oh. So you can't bring that in at all?
Yeah, that's the idea of the choke.
Okay.
But no one's reported that in 6 months of it.
Okay.
There was also meant to be landing undersized fish. That should have been landed, undersized fish. There's been no reports of increases in that. So what does that come to the conclusion? That discarding is still happening.
Yeah.
So, the outcome from that was, like I say, the House of Lords report was pretty scathing and said that, there needs to be better enforcement of it, and, criticised the government, said, you've had several years to sort this out, and, what's happening? One of the things they recommend is increased use of CCTV, remote electronic monitoring. I mean, for the fishing industry, to me, it would seem to have something that's on your boats would be a good thing to say, I'm not discarding.
Yeah.
And, no one's going to be sat there watching you 24/7, but if someone accuses you of it,
Then you
check
can
the
say, have a
tapes.
look, yeah. So what's one of the main reasons they don't? Just no force? There's no legality behind it?
Well, that was another criticism of the report was there was a lot of talk of incentivising the industry not to do it.
Yeah.
And the committee said, well, this is a law. It's not voluntary. There should be, it's not about incentivising.
Well, they're never going to self-regulate, are they?
Well, there was, you would hope that again, it's beneficial for the industry. There are challenges with it. That's clear. But there's also tools that can be brought in greater selectivity, for example, to avoid it. Maybe there needs to be a look at the quota distribution. One of the other things that came out is that there needs to be more pressure on the people who buy the fish.
Yeah.
To say, what you're doing is essentially illegal. Therefore, it falls under the umbrella of IUU, which is, no one wants IUU fish. Everyone's made commitments not having it. So, are the retailers going to actually take a stand to provide some form of system where they say, well, we're not buying it because it's IUU, and we'll be held account for it.
It just sounds like, I don't know, maybe I'm being a bit naive, but surely every fish that's caught should just be eaten. I don't know. Maybe I'm just really naive about this. But is there any way to not eliminate, but to reduce? Because they do. Boats go out and fish blindly, I assume. So they, when you drag a net, let's say, there's going to be lots of different species there. So is there a way to catch less of what they don't want and more of what they do want? And then if they do catch what they don't want, why don't we bring it back and sell it, even if it goes into, I don't know, dog food, cat food? Why does it have to get wasted?
The discard ban doesn't apply to every single thing, because as you say, there's going to be instances where you get species that it's going to be very impossible to do that, and it would just a nightmare in logistics. So it only applies to species with quota or minimum landing sizes, I can understand. So it doesn't apply to everything. So if you get like a load of brittle stars or something, and you don't have to count them and bring them in. So that's the first point. The second point is, if you wanted to avoid a certain, say you were fishing for cod and you wanted to avoid coley, then cod is larger generally. You can put bigger holes in your net to try to let the smaller fish escape. There's also things called like selector grids that you put on the start of the net that sort of forces larger fish away, smaller fish in. There's also escape nets, square mesh panels that let fish get out. There's a load of different tools out there that are not necessarily being widespreadly used. Seafish have done a database on all the research that's been done on bycatch mitigations that can be used. Now, I'm not for a minute suggesting that will solve every problem. It won't, but it will reduce the problems. There was an example. CFAS did a project down in the southwest called Project 50, I think it was, which was looking to reduce 50% of the discards or the bycatch.
Yeah.
And it got, it was 50, 60, 70% reductions using this particular rig. And they went back to the vessels sometime later, and they weren't using it anymore. And they said, well, why not? Because it was reducing your sorting time, it was increasing the quality. Yeah, but we weren't catching other things we were selling. So, there has to be some behavioural change there as well. And this is absolutely nothing specific about UK fishermen. It's happening with many other fisheries around the world. It's happening in the tuna sector, where bycatch mitigations are really easy. They're proven to work, and they're just not being adopted.
Well, moving over to tuna, you're involved with, like you say, everything tuna. And doing a bit of research, there seems to be a lot of negativity around tuna. Broadly, how bad is it? Broadly.
Now, it's a good one because there's a number of different elements here.
Yeah.
With if you're looking at stock size, which is the thing that most people associate with problems, overfishing, underfishing, the depleted stocks. Tuna is not necessarily a species or a group of species with a huge problem in stock sizes. Mm-hmm. There are some exceptions to that, but generally, 65% of tuna stocks are at a healthy level of abundance. 13% are overfished, and 22% are at an intermediate level. So that's not too bad. 78% of global fishing stocks are experiencing a low fishing mortality. 18% are overfishing, and 4% are high fishing mortality but being managed. So it's not too bad in terms of the stock status. There are some exceptions, like I say, and then figures can be skewed by the fact that most of the majority of the catch comes from skipjack. Skipjack. Is
that a Scottish tuna?
It's a Scottish tuna, yeah. Skipjack, which contribute more than half of the global stocks, and they're in good shape.
Yeah.
There's some exceptions, such as Eastern Pacific big eye, Indian Ocean yellowfin, which is overfished and overfishing is occurring. And there's also the bluefin as well, which is in some bad state as well. So that's a sort of something that we talk to people about. It's not necessarily stock size. One of the challenges with tuna is the lack of comprehensive harvest strategies. So these fisheries are not being managed that well. I mean, why is that? Well, they're on the high seas generally, so they're being managed by things called regional fishery management organisations, which are international bodies formed of the countries with fishing interests.
Okay.
So either bordering the region, like the Indian Ocean Tuna Commission, or have fishing interests in that, like the European Union. And they make the decisions. So it's incredibly difficult to get consensus, and people have different agendas and different views of sustainability. So you have certain countries who are very pro-sustainability, can see the benefits of that. Even some members of the catching sector can see the benefits of that. But they're up against people who are, maybe just interested in the bottom line tomorrow. And you've got to generally get consensus, or you have to get to a point where everything's watered down. So it's a very challenging arena to be in.
So if someone has a great idea, it's going to solve the problem. Just so many different opinions that it does end up getting watered down then.
Yeah, and that happens all the time. The ICAP meeting in Dubrovnik in November last year, there was a fisheries management for the tropical tunas, that's the big eye and yellowfin, proposed by the EU, and it was rejected by Tunisia, Algeria, two other countries. These are countries that have not got, I would say, a track record in great fisheries management or experience on the world stage for this. So, but they were able to derail it.
And there's no way you can force that through. Not you, I mean, just generally.
No.
Because everyone needs to have a consensus.
You can take it to votes. It happens very rarely. It's so much politics there.
Yeah.
So that's a challenge with the lack of harvest strategies. Now, what that means is, when there is instances where there's overfishing, it's very difficult to pull it back.
Yeah.
Because then you have to go into actually specifying specific measures rather than having a strategy in place that you just automatically roll into.
Yeah.
So if we had a harvest strategy for Indian Ocean yellowfin, when the population goes down, we automatically bring in cuts. But no, you've got to go and negotiate them, and then it's when you end up with horse trading and you end up with watered down measures.
What sort of negotiations though can go the other way? Surely, if it's being overfished, for argument's sake, that's obvious. Surely, then what's their counter argument? Like, I don't get it. What would they use as an example of why they can't do it?
It's not us; it's other people.
So
they should be cut, not us.
It's just tit for tat crap, basically.
Yeah, again, and also, not everyone's got our views on this. So that's one of the challenges. The other big challenge with tuna is bycatch, and that varies on how tuna is caught. Long line, 1 in 5 hooks can be non-target species.
Okay.
And a lot of the time it's enigmatic species that are endangered, threatened or protected, like sea turtles, sharks, seabirds, things that are particularly for the seabirds, you've got albatrosses, many of which are critically endangered and getting really impacted by long lines. And what they do is the birds see the hooks with the bait, grab the bait, get tangled up, drown. And yet there's many tools that can be used to greatly reduce 90% reductions in bird bycatch.
So I thought that line caught would be better. So maybe it's better for the fish, but it's not better for everything else.
Well, it certainly has challenges in bycatch.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't impact the seabed,
No.
like trawling or dredging, but certainly seabird bycatch is.
Is there the perfect catching method?
Oh, it depends. It really does depend on what species we're talking about. And I think SFP and my personal opinion is we don't get involved in discussions about gear type because we believe that everything has an impact, and there's ways you can mitigate that impact. Everything has a footprint, and you've got to get to that point: is what is the acceptable footprint? I am taking something from the sea. I'm going to have an impact. How can I minimise it? How can I mitigate the things that are causing the environmental footprint to be high? In terms of tuna, it's. I would say that the pole and line, the 1x1 catching, has it's a low footprint. It certainly has very, very low levels of bycatch, which is good. But there's bait use for each time you put the hook in. You've got bait on it. How is that assessed?
Yeah,
it is being assessed in many fisheries. There's a number of fisheries that are MSC certified or going through MSC certification. So that's a low impact form of fishing, but of course the volumes are they high enough, or are they ever going to be high enough to feed the global marketplace? And this is another thing we have to consider as well. The efficiency as well.
Yeah, because tuna is a staple product. It's in everyone's cupboard, isn't it? Like, and obviously you can talk about bluefin, which probably goes on. Sushi, but that's probably a small amount of what actually is eaten and consumed, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. But bluefin is, it goes to the fresh and frozen marketplace. But yes, absolutely, it's in our top 5. It's in the US's top 5. The US is like a third of the global market for canned tuna. The EU another third.
I think I read something, might be wrong now because I've read a lot today, but I think it was something like 67% or 60% of American fish consumption is tuna.
I've seen some stats. I was at the Infofish conference on tuna in Bangkok last year, and it was some eye-watering facts. Something like 83% of Americans buy tuna, and something like similar levels have tuna in their house at the time. It's mainly canned tuna, but it's that, as you say, it is a staple in America, and it's a huge marketplace.
I know my kid can't get enough of it, so. Yeah, so one thing that has come out, like in the research of sort of tuna more than other fish, is sort of human rights, human trafficking, abuses, stuff like that. What do you have any influence, not you personally, but your organisation, influence there, or is it something that's spoken about? Is it brushed under the carpet? What do you think about that?
Yeah, it's not just a tuna issue. It is an issue in tuna. So it's not just a tuna issue, but it is an issue in tuna. I'm a member of the Global NGO Tuna Forum, which is a group of NGOs that come together to work collectively and collaboratively on tuna, because we all have shared the same objectives. So rather than work independently, we try to collaborate, which is great. It's certainly something that I think the businesses we work with and others work with welcome it, because we're trying to say one message rather than lots of independent ones.
Yeah.
We discussed recently about human rights in tuna and how the forum should get involved in that, and the conclusion was, it was a varied discussion, people had different opinions, but the conclusion was that this isn't something that's strictly tuna, so the forum would take on board developments from elsewhere and try to apply it to tuna rather than coming up with any new things. But why is it an issue for tuna? It's an issue because a lot of the time these vessels are on the high seas, away from any monitoring, control and surveillance. Also, they use something called transshipment. So you have what we call a mothership, which takes the product from the catching vessels and back to port. So these vessels can remain at sea for a long time. So, a number of different challenges there on the practical side of fishing.
So a land analogy would be essentially a combine harvester. A tractor goes back and picks up. So they're just constantly out at sea.
Yeah, it can be out at sea for months.
Didn't know that. Okay.
And of course, if you have people who don't necessarily wish to be on board the vessel, they're not getting an opportunity to depart. They may be there, in bondage.
They'd have to wait 3 weeks or something.
Well, months, maybe, longer. So it's that's one of the challenges. Another challenge is that supply lines are very murky. They're very convoluted. It's not always that easy to track products. You can do it. It can be done, but it's not simple. So there is that kind of element of murkiness as well.
What would you do? Would you barcode it, tag the product? How would you monitor where it's going?
No, there are companies that do that, and then there's various tools come out. There's blockchain, which apart from knowing the name blockchain, I'm really not clear on how it works. But that's just my own ignorance. But one of the companies we work with in Hawaii, they have a system in place that tracks the products back to the individual fish and the vessel it came from. So it can be done, and of course with MSC of chain of custody as well. So it is something that can be done. But a lot of the times, you think about it, if you've got several vessels bringing their products into a mothership that's then being taken to, it's being landed, that product's being separated. Some's going to a processing hub. Some of it's going elsewhere. Some of that product's ending in the bycatch. The byproducts are ended up in pet food. The other products ended up in canned products, which then go into different marketplaces. So it's very complicated.
So who's the biggest consumer of tuna, and then who is the biggest producer of tuna?
Yeah, the biggest consumer of tuna. That's a good question, because it's often split up into fresh and frozen and shelf stable. Fresh and frozen is Japan.
Yeah.
Clearly they're huge consumer of fresh and frozen tuna. Canned, I think it's probably North America, judging by the volumes. 30% ends up there. Spain is also a very big consumer, as is Italy as well. And then you have some. If you look at some of the stats, some interesting countries there, like Egypt is a high consumer of canned tuna. And I heard a talk about the Middle Eastern market of tuna, and it's because tuna is often eaten not just for like lunch or dinner; it's eaten for breakfast as well. So there's a few interesting challenges in the Middle East at the minute, so that the data is a little bit fluctuating.
What sort of challenges?
Just the politics of the region.
Of course, yeah.
So there's been some issues there, but it's in the top 10, I think. In terms of producers, Indonesia, surprisingly for some people, is the top producer of tuna, and that's not just the big tuna that we're familiar with. There are also other species as well that's often for local consumption. But if you look at exports, you'll see countries like Thailand as well. They don't catch a lot, but they're a processing hub. So lots of
it's cheap over there, I take it.
I think it's a lot to do with it, and also they have the facilities there. So they have the tuna gets to Thailand, and then it's exported out.
And I thought Spain would have been bigger. But
Spain is a big producer and consumer.
Is that because of Ortiz Tuna?
Sorry?
Ortiz, the tuna company.
There's a number of big companies there.
There's quite a few big ones. But I think they tend to be higher quality in Spain, I think, don't they?
They do canned as well as fresh and frozen. Yeah. So it's not quite enough to sort of compete with the levels of Japan and USA just because of the population size and the demand. But there is a big player. Spain is a very important player.
And I also guess Japan insist on the best.
Yes, certainly my experience in Japan is, and this is evolving every time I go there, but beforehand it was all about quality, absolute quality number one. Now sustainability, every time I go back, sustainability is getting more and more relevance. People are talking about it more. People are realising that they've got a lot to do to catch up with the rest of the world on sustainability. The youth in Japan are much more interested in sustainability. They used to have the Olympics coming up next year, and sustainability is a key component of the Olympics. So there is the seafood sourcing guide for the Olympic Village, and as we did in London. So it's becoming front and centre. And there's the last couple of years there's been an event every November called the Tokyo Sustainable Seafood Symposium, organised by friends of ours called Seafood Legacy. And it's been incredible. It was like 600 people came last year. Wow. And this year they're making it a 2-day event. And these are mainly businesses. So it's people who are really interested and want to hear about it. Now, my colleague and I went over to Tokyo in May, and we heard from the Japanese cooperative. It's called JCCU. And what they're doing is incredible. They've got really good seafood sourcing commitments. They're making some great efforts with MSC and ASC products. But we don't hear about it. So actually, I've been in contact with them asking if they'd be interested to sort of talk about it more, because it's, their presentation they gave was really surprising. It's not what you kind of associate with Japan based on people's perceptions.
Well, no, the perception is that anything like it's endangered, especially like you hear about whaling and stuff like that, and I think we probably don't understand enough about what they eat. We were all better, aren't we? We've been a rich country for a long time, and we think that we know better. But they eat certain creatures because, well, they had to eat. So we don't understand that. But we all probably assume that they eat everything. It's endangered.
I mean, and I think there are some instances of that. As you say, whaling. It was interesting. I mean, I was speaking to a friend from Japan. The whale meat only became widespread after World War II. And there's still there are obviously some regions that have done it historically, but it's very small scale and sort of niche. But he was saying that there are restaurants in Tokyo that sell whale meat, but it's full of tourists.
Oh, really?
Yeah, a lot of the time from Australia and America.
Heard about it and think I'll go try that.
Which is sad.
So, Tom, how many different types of tuna is there, would you say?
Well, there's lots of different species of tuna. Some of them are very familiar to people, and some of them are less so. But the main ones that we're probably familiar with are yellowfin, big eye, skipjack, albacore, and then there's bluefin.
So the popular ones are probably albacore and skipjack, aren't they?
In the UK, more so yellowfin and skipjack.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah, in the US, albacore. They use different terms like light meat and white meat, and they can be interchangeable.
Is that like a more of a seasonal thing, like when it's caught, or
no? It's the different. I'm not entirely sure, to be honest.
That's right. Yeah. So we touched on it a little bit. Would you say there is a right or wrong way to catch tuna? Clearly, no human rights abuses. Clearly, letting people go when obviously something goes wrong. But then, obviously, you said line caught probably isn't as perfect. But on a personal level, do you think there is the right way?
Yeah, I mean, again, moving away from sort of the gear types, I think if you have a tuna fishery that has a comprehensive harvest strategy in place, that manages that the element of that, it has a monitoring, control, and surveillance system in place, maybe 100% observer coverage, and you have good regulations that are enforced about bycatch, then the gear type becomes almost irrelevant, because all the challenges associated with that are being addressed. In the absence of this, then you have to dig deeper and you have to look at specific issues. But I don't think we're a million miles away from getting tuna fisheries in a good place. It doesn't. We don't have any hugely impossible issues to deal with.
Is there? Not is there, but is farmed tuna a thing?
Yes, very small. There's two types to think about. There's ranched tuna, mainly bluefin, which is where you catch juveniles and put them in pens and feed them up. That's not really fish farming. That's ranching, and you're having an impact on the population. But there are places, particularly Japan, that are rearing bluefin tuna from eggs, raising them up. And I think I heard a presentation again. A great way to learn stuff is going to conferences. There was something like 12,000 individual bluefin were reared, I think in 2017 in Japan. So that's having it's small, but it's having an impact. That's 12,000 individuals that didn't have to be taken from the sea.
Yeah.
So there's some challenges with that, of course. Is what are you feeding it on? Is the feed sustainable? The same challenges there's in wider aquaculture, but can this be viewed as a positive? Well, yes, I think it can be. If it can take the pressure off the wild stock, so allowing them to recover, then maybe that's a good way of looking at it.
Share it out a little bit. But one thing that we spoke about on the phone is that farming is getting a bit of a tainted name at the moment, isn't it? Especially with salmon that was on the news or Panorama a few weeks ago. Do you think they've overdone it a little bit with salmon farming, or?
In terms of the volumes, no. I think there's scope for greater expansion of aquaculture, not just salmon, but I think that's going to be the future, to be honest. And I've always thought that, providing it's done in a manner that has a minimal footprint, then absolutely aquaculture is the future. I mean, I keep seeing it bandied about that 50% of the seafood that's eaten by humans comes from farming now. That stat seems to keep getting published. I mean, I believe it's around that level, but we always have announcements that we're now at 50%. But it's nearest that. Wild capture's plateaued. If anything, it's slightly decreasing in terms of global production of from wild fisheries, and the growth is aquaculture. So that's got to be the future for us. We can manage wild fisheries sustainably. We can keep that level, but there's not going to be a huge expansion in that. Salmon is often targeted by NGOs, and not always for bad reasons. They've certainly had some challenges. We mustn't forget that the industrial salmon industry is relatively new. So they've had challenges that they acknowledge that they've performed poorly in the past, and things are improving. Have it improved to levels that everyone is satisfied with? No, absolutely not. Has it improved to levels that people can be comfortable with? I think it depends where you are on that spectrum. Yeah. But there are a number of schemes out there now, such as the Aquaculture Stewardship Council, or ASC. We've had the Global Aquaculture Alliance's Best Aquaculture Practice BAP scheme. There's also Global GAP. So there are some environmental certification schemes, and I know ASC has done a lot of work on salmon farms, and there's a number of farms that are now certified sustainable. My old job was in Seafood Watch in America that had, when I first started, every farm salmon in open net pens was red rated. Now that's changed. There's some examples that are, small scale specific examples that are rated green, and some more that are yellow. So the improvements are happening. But there are still those people who are against it for their reasons. I think it's not saying they're wrong, and I'm not saying they haven't got things to say about it and valid criticisms, but it's about what is the acceptable footprint, and I think that's the point.
I think I mentioned this on the phone. Like, I'm only 35, but I think when I was 18, it isn't that long ago really, salmon was seen as something you have at Christmas. It was very posh. It was now probably is it probably up there with one of the most consumed fish in the world. Definitely the UK. And it's cheap. It's not as expensive as it used to be either. So I suppose from a consumption point of view, there's been great benefits, hasn't there?
Yeah, I mean, it's as you say, it's in the top 5. It may even be in the top 3, and it experiences growth. I think the latest figures, it experienced growth again in terms of sales in the UK. It's popular, as you say. It tends not to have bones in. It doesn't smell of fish. This is the traditional challenges of the consumer. It's easy. I mean, you can buy it at the wet counter, and it's already got a coating on it or something. 2 for £4 at the local supermarket. Or there's packs, in the plastic. You just pop it in the oven or on a grill or on a frying pan. It's done. It's simple. It's good for you. The omega-3s. It's a winner in terms of that. You don't have to do a lot. No one buys it. Well, very few people buy a whole salmon and cuts it up themselves. You don't need to. The supermarket's doing that for you.
Yeah. And you were quite impressed by the fact that they have now put them in the packs with the sauces and the butter and so on. It removes that scary feeling of cooking with salmon, doesn't it? Or even fish. Oh, I don't know what I'm going to do with it, blah, blah. Whereas you've got it all in there, in the oven, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever it is, and you've got a nice meal. And I think that's something that, what company was it? Saucy Fish or something, wasn't it? And you were quite impressed by that.
Yeah, Icelandic, I think it was. Yeah, Saucy Fish. I mean, it was so simple.
And then obviously the supermarkets like Aldi and so on all just copied them, and that had some court cases of its own anyway. But so one thing, talking of supermarkets, is like the issues of like sustainability. And I sort of mentioned it to you earlier, but you go into the supermarket, you see a huge MSC sign. They've got all, really sort of like a good selection, maybe of 10 different fish or seafood. But then they've also got skate. And one thing that's always sort of, coming from the restaurant, fish and chip industry that's been frowned upon is selling skate. So you sort of put me right already, but tell everyone else, sort of, why is it that that's okay? Why is it that they're okay to sell skate, but we're not? So clarify it for everyone.
Yeah, they are absolutely not selling common skate, which is the the one that's in dire straits and it's endangered, and they just wouldn't be selling it at all. It will be another ray species, maybe the cuckoo ray or the starry ray. One of the rays that will meet their seafood sourcing commitments. So it wouldn't be in a perilous position. But they're allowed to call it skate legally. All the skates and ray species can be called skate. Some supermarkets do call them ray. They say ray wings, but it's about what people associate with the product. I want a bit of skate. You're not actually asking for skate, the species. You're just asking for a wing off one of the ray species. So that's that. If you look at the label carefully, it will probably say Raja species. So it may even give you the actual species name, but it wouldn't be the common skate.
So a fish and chip shop and a restaurant or whatever, a seafood restaurant, could sell skate providing it was one of those species.
Yeah, that's right.
And you definitely, you'd put your money on the fact that none of it's common skate.
It's very rare to catch it nowadays because they're in such a state. They do get caught, but they get released back because they are they're critically endangered.
Oh, really? Okay, well that really does answer it, because it was something that come to my attention this morning on the phone, and a friend of mine said to me, I get his point, but we just don't understand that bit. So yeah, so back to tuna, because I think I've missed a quite important bit, but mercury in tuna seem to always be a bit of an issue. And you never really hear about it with other fish as much. And so give us a little bit of information as to why. Because it's something I don't really understand a lot about.
So how does mercury end up in the tuna? Well, mercury ends up in the environment through natural processes, but also through pollution, and it's eaten or absorbed by very small organisms, zooplankton, that is then eaten by small fish, which are then eaten by bigger fish, which are then eaten by tuna. And each time that happens, the mercury is concentrated. It sort of bioaccumulates in the tissue, and it ends up in tuna in higher concentrations. Then when we eat the tuna, then we can absorb the mercury, which is in the form of methyl mercury, into our bodies. That's a fact. It happens. It does. Is it a health risk? Well, that's where the arguments start. There's a lot of people out there who say it is, but I've noticed that a lot of the groups who say that are environmental organisations who are maybe have ulterior motives, because there are no set limits globally agreed on mercury, safe levels of mercury, though the EU has one, for example. In the UK, for example, from the NHS website, or I think it's the NHS website, if you're trying for a baby or are pregnant, you should have no more than 4 cans a week or 2 tuna steaks a week. So that's quite a lot of tuna. This is not something that you're regularly going to be eating 4 tins a week every week.
Sounds quite steep.
I think it is, and if you are someone who eats that, that's fine. There's no restrictions on you or I eating that. It's just if you're pregnant or trying for a baby, because the mercury can accumulate into the baby itself. So because it concentrates in the placenta. So that's where it is. But they also note that the benefits of eating seafood greatly outweigh the risks. So eating seafood has so many nutritional elements in there, high levels of omega-3, the long chain omega-3 acids, which are good for you. So you need to be considering that. Tuna is not the only problem, or the only species.
That was my next question.
Yeah, it's other fish like marlins, swordfish, sharks. In fact, they have higher levels of mercury, but they're much, much less consumed. So it's only the fact that tuna is ever flagged is because it is such a popular seafood.
So talking of contaminants of the sea, because obviously mercury is one, and you mentioned that obviously although it accumulates on its own, it's also from pollution. How big of an issue is plastics in the sea? Is it the biggest issue, or is it the most talked about issue?
It's without question the most trendy subject. It's certainly the most talked about, and it's unfortunately, I would say, it's clouding other more important, more pressing issues such as climate change and overfishing. So I'm a bit skeptical of that. I think there's a lot of quick fixes that are being bandied around that are going to have minimal impact. For example, plastic straws, because that's not going to change
I'm
the world.
utterly convinced, and I've been saying it for a long time, that the plastic straw issue, providing that it was recycled, isn't an issue. So the onus is on the recycling bit, not the fact that it's a plastic straw. But the paper straws are lined with PLE that don't dissolve. So the outside bit, which is paper, goes all mushy and spoils your drink. It tastes like you're eating out of toilet roll. Drinks like toilet roll. But the PLE doesn't dissolve. So not only is it heavier to transport, I just don't get it. I think it just seems like a bunch of virtue signalers kicking off about one little thing. And I'm trying not to be like that guy. Yeah, all plastic's better, because clearly it's not always better. But there is the reusability of plastic that we're not going to reuse a straw. But you can see how, you're right that there's so many other things going off that are being completely ignored at the moment, whilst everyone looks at plastic straws and plastic cutlery. So how big are the other things? So, talking about climate change, what else is there that's going on with?
I mean, just sticking with plastics. I mean, it is a problem. Without question.
Yeah, I'm not trying to rub it off completely, but I just think that when you do some research, you see that 8 out of the 11 pollution sites are all in Asia. And that doesn't mean that they're doing it on purpose. But it comes from 8 or 9 rivers from that area. We absolve ourselves by selling it to those bidders, and that then dump it in the sea, which I mean the UK, like many other countries, we don't want to put it in our landfill because it looks bad, and then we send it there and they just dump it. So yeah, I can see it being a problem, and we should all be making these choices, but I'd rather have no straw than a paper straw.
Yeah, and I think that's, there's a lot we can do that's not going to impact on our lives, that we can make things better. I mean, reducing plastics, absolutely, I'm 100% behind that, because it seems to me to be pointless. Why would I not take, whenever I fly, and I fly a lot, I take my water bottle with me. And it's always fun and games going through security, because I have to undo it and demonstrate that it's empty. But as soon as I get through security, I fill it up. There's always taps at airports that you can, certainly UK airports, that you can fill it up with. There's absolutely no point in spending money on plastic water bottle that's ridiculously priced, and having that waste plastic. So there's things you can easily do.
There's some things that are just absolute common sense. I get it completely. There's also things that you just think, we're just being silly.
Yeah, I think it's part of a wider picture of consumption. I mean, one thing that really, really frustrates me is the kids' toys at McDonald's. Yeah. I've got 2 young kids. You met them.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a treat to take them to McDonald's, and the youngest one particularly wants the kids' meal with the toy. It's awful plastic nonsense that ends up in the recycling.
Cheap tat, isn't it?
Yeah, and I banned Kinder Eggs in the house, because I think, not for the chocolate, but for the plastic toy. It's disposable, and I really hate that. And I'd much rather spend my money on Lego for the kids. It's not disposable. They can. The kids play with my Lego sets from years ago.
They're not going nowhere, are they? And I see that even Lego recently have changed over to like a more I don't know, eco-friendly plastic or whatever. Lego doesn't go anywhere. Who throws Lego away?
Exactly.
But I just think, is there a lot of people that are virtue signalling, jumping on the bandwagon, or is it a valid point?
I think it is. I think there's plenty of people with the right intentions. For reducing the plastic. I mean, you see images of plastic in the sea, and that's what stimulates action, and that's good, because we want people to be aware of the problems, and we want everyone to act. If everyone can act and everyone does something differently, that's going to improve the world, and that's absolutely.
I think these things need to be put in place for consumers. I think if the government says, look, do X, Y, Z, and then it's easier for us. I went to a food show late last year, and me and a friend's walking around, and we go up to an eco-friendly compostable stand. We say to them, is this compostable? He goes, well, no. And he goes, well, it's a plastic made from vegetables, but it's not compostable unless your local site does it. And no one in the UK does it, really. You think, well, it's not compostable. And I think that's the problem, that a lot of people are jumping on the bandwagon. And I get it. We're consumers are making this choice and going for the greener packaging, but it's not any better for us. And you think it's just ended up in landfill where it can't be processed. So I think we're just really uneducated on the topic.
When there is coordinated action like the shopping bag, getting rid of them,
That makes sense.
it works. I'm sure some people moaned about it at the start, but I mean, you just learn to deal with it and take your bags in with you. And if you forget, you can buy a bag for life, and it lasts a lot longer. And that's a simple thing that's great. And there's more supermarkets now talking about the way they package products, which is great. One of the things that I think is on the radar for many people in the seafood industry, is what is the impact of these plastics on seafood?
Yeah.
I mean, there's, we're still at an early stage, but there's, increasing levels of research that's showing you can get plastic, microparticles of plastic in the flesh. The first papers were on filter feeders, not surprising, like mussels, filtering out these little particles. That's what they do. But getting into the flesh of fish, not just the digestive tract, which we tend not to eat generally. So that's going to be a concern, and I don't know enough about that at the minute, but it's something that I know is on people's radars.
Is there enough effort to clean the sea? Do you think you see these videos on YouTube and it's like this cleaner, but I just actually never see anybody talking about it or actually doing it. They all seem like concepts. Is there anything actually being done, do you think?
Well, there is that Pacific cleanup that you mentioned, and it received an awful lot of criticism from environmentalists. Quite a few, I knew and I saw, and I felt it was a bit sad because at least you've got someone trying something, and
some is better than none.
Well, you think that there were some good comments about the impacts of that on larvae and sea life, and that's valid. But I mean, where's everyone else's solutions?
Well, yeah, exactly. Everyone's just pointing the finger. And I can be a bit like that, I get that. But I think that maybe I'm showing my age a little bit. Yeah. You laugh there. So here's a weird question that came to me today. Do the Japanese overfish and then freeze tuna so they can sell it later on at a profit? Well, nothing wrong with selling it later on as a profit, maybe. I don't know. But what do you think about that?
Yeah, I remember this. At the time, it was maybe 10 years ago. It was in one of the tabloids about Japanese company stockpiling Mediterranean bluefin, thinking that when it collapsed and went, they would be sitting on a gold mine.
All right.
I don't think so. Bluefin tuna goes into the very high quality sashimi market in Japan. It's all about the quality. And if you're going to be freezing it for a long term, some of that quality is going to go. So that's the first bit. Freezing product is just normal. It's to iron out sort of peaks and troughs in supply. So that's completely understandable. That's what they do, and that's how they ship it as well. So minus 60 frozen. Yeah, that happens. But I do not believe that they're sitting on it for that. That story it's never gone anywhere. The market hasn't changed. The populations are at very poor levels, but in the Mediterranean, things are improving. While there's uncertainty on the level of abundance in the Eastern Atlantic and the Mediterranean, this is based on the scientific data. The stock is believed to be increasing, and overfishing is not believed to be occurring. And there have been suggestions that the fishery could be certified. Now, I think that's completely premature to even consider that, but the signs are that things are getting better. Now, that's based on the evidence I've seen, not personal experience. But so if that was the case, then that's going against that theory.
I think if we just jump onto sustainability for a moment, which just comes off the back of what you just said, and I think there's a key issue that especially in the UK, we mostly eat 5 species. I just don't know how that is sustainable. If we're essentially not only, but the majority of the fish we eat is that, we're going to have an unhealthy attachment to it. We've got over 40 species around the British waters that we only eat 3 or 4 of. It just makes you think, should we? We touched on it before we started the podcast, and in the podcast with Lauren from MSC, I didn't really get to articulate it, and she probably she's a lot more knowledgeable than me, but there's got to be a difference between responsibly sourcing and sustainably sourcing. And I think, and just to break it down for listeners, I think that responsibly sourcing, you've got location, distance, environmental concerns, and so on, and sustainability in that. Whereas sustainable is just sustainable. Nothing else really comes into play. And I think, you could probably get hake from, I don't know, Africa, for argument's sake, and it's sustainable. But then it flew all the way to the UK in freezers, and whereas I could get hake from Newlyn. And I wonder if I'm better off buying the one from Newlyn, which is still sustainable, I guess, and very tasty. And it did a quarter of the miles and a quarter of the energy. Do you see where I'm coming from on that?
Yeah, and it's a great question. The Sustainable Seafood Coalition, which is a group of businesses facilitated by an NGO called Klein Earth, have recently produced a set of codes for that, so that everyone signs up to when they can and how they can use the term sustainable and responsible. For example, sustainable would be something like MSC certified, whereas responsible, they've got a flow chart of what is and what isn't. So I won't go into the technical side of it, but they've come to agreement so that people aren't interchangeably using terms and confusing the consumers, and trying to get some standardization there. So that's great. I'm fully supportive of that, and I know they're doing it in Spain and maybe elsewhere as well. So that's a super initiative and really good. With your example, which is tied into that, it depends on your metric. And this is what they've done at the SSC. They've defined a metric. Now, on your metric, if you're including food miles, say, if you have hake from Newlyn, hake from Africa, and they're both, the environmental footprint is the same in terms of the fishing environmental footprint, then yeah, I would agree that the one from Newlyn is much better because it's much closer. You don't have the transportation. But what about communities? Are you benefiting a community in Africa by sourcing from it? Is there some community project down there? But what about Newlyn? What about the community in Newlyn? So you've got to take on that on board as well. So unless you have all this information to hand and it's all weighted in some way, you're really unable to make that distinction. So this is why most NGOs tend to focus purely on environmental sustainability and keep that siloed. Then everything else can be added on according to your preferences, and that's changing somewhat. People are bringing in social elements as well, which is a huge, that's hugely important. But often it's less of a grey area. It's either it is slave free, or it's not. There's no halfway house there. So it depends on your metric. I've had the argument of people saying, yeah, but my fish is local, therefore it's sustainable. No, it's not. It is absolutely not. It does not mean it's sustainable. It means it's local. Now, if we want to assess it to see whether it's sustainable, brilliant. Then it is local and sustainable if it meets those metrics. But just because it's local, it doesn't mean that it's not coming from an overfished population. It doesn't mean that the stock is a terrible state. It doesn't mean that overfishing isn't occurring, and it doesn't mean that the impact of fishing is highly destructive on a protected feature. Until we do that assessment, we don't know.
So my argument in some ways could have been oversimplified, is what you're saying, in some ways, that if I was just saying, well, it's local, it must be good. But yes, that's because it's local, but there's so many other factors that meet that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the local is, if locality is the most important thing, then go with it.
Yeah.
But often as not, that is a component of it.
So just to clarify this one in my head, it's not as easy as saying, I buy local lamb. Can't say the same for fish sometimes because there's so many other factors that go into it. Is that right?
You can. I mean, you can. Yeah. You could easily say, I only source from this local fishery. And it might be that the fisheries is a great fishery, with a very low environmental footprint. And there's plenty of examples of that. There's some great examples of low impact, sustainable fishing in the UK. Particularly, the sort of the inshore fishing, it's really well managed. It's stewarded by the fishermen who've got a vested interest. They can't move on. This is where they fish. This is where they live. Life, and there's some super examples there that you can really be championed, not only for the sustainability, but the fact that the localness of it, and depending on Brexit, PGEI designations and things like that as well. So you can really champion that.
So you've just made a nice little segue for me because I literally just highlighted my next topic, which is Brexit. And so UK stroke Scottish fishermen seem pretty excited. And I say UK stroke Scottish, obviously the same thing, but I see a lot more talk about it in Scotland on Twitter. And they seem pretty excited about Brexit because they're going to get their fishing rights back. How do you think this could develop, with common fisheries policy and so on?
I'll ask you a question. What do you mean by get their fishing rights back?
Well, see, the way I understand it, and I wasn't party to a lot of this, the common fisheries policy, because I think it was maybe a bit before my time. But from what they say is that they are going to get their fishing rights back, that they feel that the European boats or other boats just come in and they're allowed in where we're not allowed back. So that's what I follow from looking at them on Twitter. So am I way off base?
Well, you have to go back to the beginnings of the Common Fisheries Policy. When the Common Fisheries Policy was established, the architects of it looked at historic fishing practices and allocated quota based on that. So there was stability, and they call it relative stability. So if you were fishing this particular species in this region that maybe wasn't in your territorial waters, because before then territorial waters was much further inland, then you wouldn't be penalised for that. You would still be doing it. And unfortunately for the UK, a lot of our fishing was in non-common fishery policy waters around Iceland, for example. So that there's a lot of instances where fishing activity wasn't in our our new waters. Mm-hmm. So they were penalised by that. And there's other examples of fishing rights being traded away by a government that was not very interested in the fishing sector as well. So there's been an analysis done by University of Shetland. It's nothing wrong with it at all. It's 100% accurate, and it showed that the majority of what could be considered UK fish, i.e. fish that is caught in UK waters, is by non-UK vessels. I think it's 70%. I think so. I'm not entirely sure. That's not to say that we do not fish in other member states' waters. We do, not to that scale. There is a deficit there. So I can understand why people would be upset about that. But that's only a part of the issue, because this is politics with a big P and a little p here. So the first question is: if we Brexit, we leave, could we kick out all the foreign vessels from? Yes, we can. We can absolutely do that. You can kick them out. It's your waters.
Whereas we couldn't now.
You couldn't now. Okay. No. You can do it. You can kick them out. But this is where the consequences come in. Do we really want that increased, what I'd call political tension, with a huge trading bloc where the vast majority of our fish goes? Because that's you're shooting yourself not only in the foot but in the head. Even today, covered in the media, French fishermen.
I saw it today. Yeah. Someone sent it this morning.
Yeah, they are.
Basically, we can't come to you. You can't come to us.
Yeah, that's it. And this is several fisheries ministers across Europe have said market access is dependent on fishing access. Now, it isn't. Boris Johnson came out and said these are not linked. Well, they're not technically linked, but that's not the point. If you've got negotiators saying, well, we want access. So whilst technically correct, you can kick foreign vessels out, I can't see that happening. And to be honest, many people in the fishing industry realise this and are not calling for that. They understand the bigger picture, maybe more so than some of the politicians.
One thing you said on the phone is that, and it's not... British catch doesn't align with what we eat. Most of British fish goes abroad because of how good quality it is. Scallops go abroad because of excellent quality, yet we import back. See, that's important, isn't it? Because if all these fishermen are saying, oh, it's okay, we've got the best product on the market, and you're saying, well, no one's going to want to buy that because they're going to do this whole tit-for-tat thing for a while anyway. And it goes back to British tastes. Well, why don't we eat those great scallops? Why don't we eat the great langoustines? Why don't we have that excellent haddock that's from the North Sea, fresh? Why is it that we all end up where we are, do you think, in some ways?
Yeah, that's a challenge that's been sort of posed within the industry. The whole seafood sector for ages, certainly since I've been working in it, is how do we get the British public to eat more and more diverse seafood? And it's a real challenge. One of the latest data from from Seafish has come out that I think it's the top 5 are still the top 5.
Okay. So salmon, cod, haddock, prawns,
tuna,
and right in that order, obviously. But
it's they're the top 5. They're a long way ahead of the rest of them.
Yeah,
but the amount we eat has decreased. I think the average portions, the amount the average person eats is 1.08 portions a week. That's on average, and that's the lowest it's been since 1982.
But why is that, do you think? What's the consumer research saying?
Well, it's showing sales are down.
Okay.
Retail's down 16%.
Could it be down to price?
I think price comes into it because prices are increasing. But then again, there is a trend of the performance of the economy with seafood consumption, and there was a decrease in 2007, and it had been, the economy is performing better. But there's probably 101 different varieties, and there's also, you've got to break it down into the ages as well, because the people who are eating more fish are the elder component of the population.
I think sometimes what puts people off with fish, I think, is that there's hardly any fishmongers around anymore. I said this on the phone, didn't we? Like, fishmongers, they'd go, they'd be like a butcher. Oh, have you tried this cut? Have you tried this species? Have you tried? Whereas now it's like, Tesco essentially put fishmongers out of business to some degree, and now have decided to. And your point on this was really interesting on the phone, because I said, "Oh, it's right, they put them out of business, but now they're closing them." But you said, "Well, maybe they've not seen an increase because they'd still be selling it if there was a need for it, wouldn't they?"
Yeah,
for the fish counters, that is.
So, in retail, frozen and ambient sales have dropped by nearly 25% over the last 10 years.
Wow.
Which is incredible. But we are seeing growth in the fresh
side,
which I think is fueled a lot by sushi. Because that is the growth area, or a growth area.
Again, this is the weird paradox with sushi, that in Japan they would use hundreds of species, and yet in the UK it's salmon and tuna. And mostly cut, because we're afraid of raw food. Restaurants might do it raw, but again, we're not using the abundance that's available to us.
Well, I actually just did a piece for Intrafish on this very thing. It's about, my kids love sushi, absolutely love it, and so it's a treat for them to go to a sushi restaurant with a conveyor belt. That's what makes it special. And they love it, and they're very adventurous, and they'll try it. But the last time I was in a chain, they had a big sign up saying, we're not just raw fish, and then they had a big poster about the chicken katsu curry and the beef something or other, and it shocked me because I thought, wow, sushi isn't just fish. I know that sashimi is the fish, but if you ask people what sushi is, they certainly in this country it's fish. That's where the association is.
If you put sushi on your phone, you get a little emoji with rice and fish on top.
Exactly. It's just it's not technically correct, but it's a perception. So my always thinking is sushi is something that you've got to be pretty adventurous to try it. So you're already in that mindset. Now, you may be going with someone who loves sushi, and you're going to want chicken because you don't like it. Fair enough. But someone in your party wants fish.
Yeah.
And isn't that a good place to start? Mm-mm. Because the sushi growth in the millennial sort of age group is high. This may be the way we get them back into seafood. The fishmonger question is, even if we let's say 10,000 new fishmongers open tomorrow, do people know how to deal with a fishmonger? Have we lost that now? Do we need to reteach that? Because you go in and you see all this fish. If you don't know that, you can say to the fishmonger, yes, I'd like that fish, and can you
give me a suggestion?
Yeah, I want you to get rid of the bones and the skin, and I want you to make it so all I need to do is pop it in the oven like I can get from Tesco's. They would do it.
Yeah,
they would be happy to do it. But you don't know. I don't think people know you can do that.
I think, but then lately I've changed my shopping habits, and this year I buy a lot more meat from the butchers, the local butchers, rather than the supermarket. They'll do anything for you. If you said, "Oh, can you do this?" They've even got a Himalayan salt fridge where they will hang the meat for another 2 weeks for you, 3 weeks for you, or whatever it is that you want. I think that we forget that the local business is always going to bend over backwards for you a little bit. So if it was a fishmonger's, I think they would fillet it and give you a suggestion on how to roast it, bake it, pan fry it, whatever it may be. But I think that it's that convenience factor, isn't it? But I think it goes back to those sauces that you mentioned that are in the packet. You can just get your salmon with a teriyaki sauce in the oven, 7 minutes. Get a glass of wine or whatever it is, make a salad, and you're good to go. And that's one of the biggest benefits with fish that you don't really have with chicken or beef and all of that. That they all take a bit longer to cook, whereas these can all be done really fast.
Well, I mean, we do eat a lot of fish in this country in terms of fish and chip shop. I mean, the portion,
massively. Yeah.
The portion size is 1.08. I told you it's low, but fish. There's always a queue. Fish and chip shop on a Friday night, so it's something that's in the psyche. I don't know, with fishmongers, I think you go in, you see fish, you see a price per kilo. I don't know how much it's going to cost. I can't budget. I only want some fish for my family for tea tonight. I think there could be more done to help people. We're not used to it. There's not this, you're just not this knowledge.
I think more could be done for the home, but I also think more could be done in a restaurant, fish and chip setting as well, like food retail. I think everyone is just so hung up on cod and haddock in that setting. So, cod and haddock is probably the most abundantly consumed fish, I'd say, especially if you put in the fish and chip figures and the pubs and the restaurants that all do fish and chips. Rarely do you see pollock, coley, and I like coley. I don't like pollock as much, but everyone might be different. But ling, all of these other fish that are from the cod family that we won't touch because we don't like their name, or we think they're going to have bones in, or it's going to have skin on. So I do wonder if, I don't know if it's Seafish's job or somebody else's job, but could they do more to push different species to the end consumer? And is it their job to? I don't know. Is it Seafish's job to? I don't know.
It's a difficult one because it's because the levy comes from not just UK fish as well. You can't promote UK fish.
Okay.
You have to promote seafood.
Okay. Yeah.
And so that is the real challenge. And this is something that many people don't seem to understand or don't seem to grasp, is that you can't just, if you look at the levy, you think, well, we should we should be promoting Icelandic fish because so much levy comes from the Icelandic fish.
Yeah.
But that's a different angle. There has been a lot of people talking about the different, trying to get people to eat different bits and pieces. We've had Tesco's a while back did their Catch of the Day initiative that was trying to get people eating more fish, and I'm sure Gary Hooper, who was used to work at Tesco's, was I remember seeing him talk about that. The Marine Conservation Society have actually done a post-Brexit top 10. So if we are in a situation where we've got to eat more of our own products, they've given a list of top 10 that they recommend, and that includes things like seine-netted dab, MSC hake from Cornwall, which you mentioned, rote-grown mussels, absolutely, brown crab from Devon, inshore podding area, Dover sole from the Western Channel. So there's plenty of options there. Now, maybe there's not enough volume to go into every single supermarket, and that's obviously one of the challenges. But there are options out there.
I think the problem is that everything's revolved around the supermarket. That's probably one of the key problems, in my opinion. I get why, because there's volume, there's traffic there. But I just think we've lost. I think the benefit with meat is butchery. Lost that connection with seafood, I think. Maybe I'm wrong.
Well, if you go into a butcher's, you don't see a cow.
I don't know. You're starting to see carcasses out now again. You are. Like my local butcher, their window has carcasses in. And I was chatting to another butcher in preparation for the podcast, and he goes, "We don't hide from it." He goes, we don't hide from it no more. We'll have trotters in the display. We'll have a pig in the display. He goes, and I think he said that some more people are drawn to that. Others are not, obviously, clearly. But if you're already in the butchers, I think you probably like meat. I'd say. I think the problem with fish is that they're small and they're silvery and they've got a sheen on them, which is everything that's good. The eyes glisten. I think people look at it and think, alien thing. And I think that's probably the difference. Whereas a cow, you see it in the countryside, don't you? Almost like. I don't know. Maybe. Yeah.
Well, I think it's one of the expectations. You're not going to go into a butcher's and buy the animal.
No, you buy the part of.
Yeah. You know that. Just absolutely assume that you're going to go in and you're going to buy some mince or some chops or something.
Yeah.
You're not going to be given a sheep.
Whole cow. Yeah.
But you go into a fishmonger's. Is there the expectation that you're going to be? I want a mackerel fillet, but you're going to be given a mackerel. And what do I do with this?
Yeah.
So maybe there needs to be. I don't know. It's just, I'm basing this on my own experience.
No, I get that,
It's
yeah.
like, is there more training that can be done to the public to say this is what happens at fishmongers? You will not be given the fish unless you ask for the fish.
Yeah.
Because we're not expecting you to do it. That's our job.
Yeah.
Because we're skilled.
Yeah, we'll do that for you. Yeah. So, what do you think that less fish is also being consumed because of sort of like the popular vegan movement? Do you think, because I see fish as a halo food anyway, but do you think that maybe some of that is down to, veganism?
Well, it could be, because the demand for meat-free, including fish products in the UK, increased by nearly 1,000% in 2017, which really surprised me. Now, I don't eat meat myself. I eat seafood. So I'm, pescatarian. So, I sort of look out for things like this, sort of meat alternatives. And you are seeing an increasing number of seafood alternatives. Now, that doesn't apply to me, because I'd rather than get, fake scampi, I'd rather get scampi. Yeah. But you do see it, if you're shopping in that sort of part of the supermarket, and there's now meat-free or tuna-free tuna flakes in a tin. Holland and Barrett sell it, and it's the same price as tuna.
If this was a video, by the way, you'd see me screwing up my face.
So. I've never bought that. I might try it just to see what it's like. But the reviews is on the Holland and Barrett webpage. The reviews are not good. For it as a taste sensation. So. But yeah, there's a number of vegans as well, quadrupled from 2014 to 2018, which is incredible numbers. So we are seeing a rise in this. There's also the flexitarian movement, which is plant-based with occasional meat, and there's an increase in that as well. So that could be impacting the. I've got no evidence.
No, we're just talking.
Yeah, but it could well be impacting. It would be interesting to see similar figures for the other proteins, to see whether poultry, pork, lamb, beef, see if they're seeing a downturn as well. Because if we're seeing such a rise in meat-free products, there's got to be an impact somewhere.
I think anecdotally, I've got no proof on me at the moment, but I think I read somewhere the other day that in, I don't know if I'm going to say it right, but in the vegan January thing, meat was still doing really well, and they think that that's probably because people still bought the vegan food, probably mildly disappointed with it, or still hungry, or got it wrong, and then just went and bought what they usually buy. So it then makes you wonder, that was a great marketing tool, because not only did they buy more vegan food, bought more meat. I don't know, I just think, I don't like the idea of seeing all the, I'm not going to stop anybody from doing it, but I think if you're going to be, I just don't like the over-processing of food, like fake tuna, for argument's sake. I don't know how that's ever going to be good. I don't know. Like, you're never going to match the texture. You're never going to match the flavour. Sometimes tuna in a tin can be pretty dry in the first place. So, yeah, imagine if it's drier. That'd be awful. So, I don't know. I think I don't mind what you do, which is obviously pescatarianism. That's fine. Everyone's going to do what they want to do. But you're still eating good food. But I think we, as consumers, we're now saying, "Oh, I don't want beef. I want something that tastes like beef." And it's usually 40 different chemicals and lots of different grains and sunflower oil all blended together. And it's like, here you go. It's this grey matter. I don't know if I like that. I don't know.
Yeah, it's certainly something that I'm aware of. You make the choice. I mean, I don't eat meat not because I don't like the taste. I mean, I do. It's just just fed up seeing stories of ill treatment of animals. That's where it's driven from.
And I get that. I get that completely. And I think the way I can fix that is with purchasing power. I think people generally only make changes when you vote with your feet. For example, I choose not to buy pork from the supermarket because I find that it's young, it's got this really sweet flavour. It's very the fat's got water in it. You can see it. Well, I buy it from the butcher because I know that he cares to choose a good farmer because he wants to be in business next year. So does the farmer want to be in business next year? The farmer's not going to be kicking his animal because he looks after his animals, isn't he? And I think we should all vote with our feet because I think people only make change when they see their customers shifting where the money goes. And if the money stops, well, you're not my customer anymore. So I think that's half the problem, I think, to some degree. But that's just me. I get that. Everyone, like we said earlier, everyone's got an opinion. That's fine. We should respect that. Should be screaming at each other over Twitter.
We need to look at the why why are we seeing these shifts? And one of the drivers may be the press that the climate change gets and the impact of protein production.
Yeah.
And certainly, if you scan headlines of that, it's
meat.
Yeah,
beef.
Yeah, you can just give up meat, and that's the most effective thing you do for the climate change kind of story. Now, there are studies around that say that it has a high impact, and I think it's a little bit more nuanced than that. There's different impacts you can have. Within, if you look at the actual impacts per protein, there's going to be a standard deviation. There's going to be some have higher than the average and some have lower. I was fascinated by a report that came out recently that it said that eating some kinds of farmed shellfish, particularly mollusks, mussels, is actually better for the environment, or maybe I think the term's least impactful than a vegan diet. So that turns that on its head a little bit.
Because they're sort of like they're cleaners, aren't they? They clean the water they're in, don't they?
Well, if you think about farm mussel, always have been a huge fan of farm mussels. They're the most sustainable source of omega-3s, without question. You're not adding anything. You put in ropes in the sea on buoys that barely touch the seabed, just with the anchor points. The seed settle from the water column. They grow. They filter out. You don't have to feed them anything. Then you pull them. You're not dredging on the floor.
Because they just eat what's in the water, the plankton and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And the shells are absorbing carbon. I just can't see anything wrong. Yeah, and I don't know anyone who's any NGO
that hates them.
Yeah, they all recommend them as a good choice.
It tastes amazing too. Like, I don't think there's. I'm not going to replace fish and chips for it, but it's a completely different thing. Like, mussels are just ace. But I think people probably think they're like little aliens, but I love them. Like, I don't know.
Well, I think one of the clever things that the marketing people have done with mussels is put them in these packs, vacuum packs, with some sauce, and you just have to open the pack, tip it out into a bowl, and microwave them for like a minute, and they are done. It's so clean, it's quick, it's convenient. They are not expensive. They're often like £2.50 for a pack. For me, this is the future.
Yeah, we were in Bath over the weekend. Went to a friend of mine's restaurant called the Scallop Show. It was a lovely restaurant, busy. And I had fish and chips, but two of the ladies had mussels. It was a huge bowl of mussels. I'll show you a photo afterwards. And it was so tasty. They were really fat and meaty. And you think, why isn't everybody doing that? But I think you do see them more on the menu now.
Yeah.
So I think I was going to ask you, about some success stories. That's one of them, the mussels. What else would you say is a success story with fish?
No, well, I think there's many you can choose from. Examples of fisheries that have done, extremely well. If you look at some of the MSC certifications, that's a good metric of success. A lot of those fisheries were already doing a great job, and they were respectively badged for doing what they were already doing. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's great. But there are also fisheries that have gone from poor performances to greater performances. They've actually made the improvements and have come out the other side. And often, increasingly now, they're doing it through a formalised structure called a fishery improvement project. So you're taking a fishery that is, has been in a particularly poor state, or maybe just has a challenge. You've addressed that as stakeholders, including government, regulators, and the fishing sector, and taken it out the other end and got MSC certified. So that's a great story there that you actually said we've improved it. And SFP have actually wrote a paper came out this year that's showing that the FIPS do result in improvements. So you are seeing this. It's not just badging something that's already good. You're actually taking poorly performing fisheries and going from A to B, which is exactly the purpose of them, and that's great. So FIPS, as they're called, are a great success story, and they're all around the world, lots of different species in place. There's also some examples of fisheries that have had management measures brought in that have made them highly performing. One example I really like is the Alaskan weather vane scallop. It's dredged, it's high impact, but the areas you're allowed to fish in are heavily monitored, and they're a small proportion of the actual available seabed. And that's been awarded a green rating by Seafood Watch.
So they're not dredging everywhere. They're
Correct.
dredging within, like, let's say, football pitch size, and they're never allowed out of that. Sorry, they're not allowed out of that.
So it's all about footprints.
Yeah.
So there is a footprint. No one's denying it. The footprint is highly impactful, but it's an acceptable footprint because it's not, as you say, going everywhere. It's heavily regulated, and therefore that fishery is being rewarded with the badge of approval from Seafood Watch, which is used by many retailers in the US. So they see that, and it's market access. So there's that. It's a reward for the fishermen as well.
So that's the sort of successes. What would you say? What risks, immediate risks, do you see with the seafood? Any that are like, that's an issue. Like anything you can think of there.
There's a number of different sort of layers to that.
Yeah.
I think a threat to the industry as a whole, I think, is going to be animal welfare. Mm-hmm. I think that's something that's been talked about a lot, and I think it's it could come any moment where people start challenging about the welfare of fish. Now it's tend to be focused on mammals, and I think that's probably some just the way we're wired. But if that ever goes to seafood in a big way, then that's going to cause some challenges for people. It's already there to a certain extent in the fish farming sector, but it's not really been in the wild sector, with the exception of crustaceans. So I think that's something that's always at the back of my mind. Climate change is a huge unknown. There's plenty of scenarios out there about how it will impact the seafood sector globally. There's other smaller issues. I mean, for the shellfish side, which I've done some experience with the climate change work. Ocean acidification, which is a component of climate change, that's already affecting hatcheries in America, for example. It can affect the viability of shellfish, such as mussels. Diseases in the water, like Vibrio, increased occurrences of diseases that are in filter feeders, which could have a significant impact on the harvesting of them. Actually not being able to harvest them because you would wait with it. So that's going to have an impact. Even increased sea level could impact the harvesting sites and all the infrastructure that's around. So, and that's just on one sector. So I think that's really worrying. There's also the migration of stocks from where they currently are because of warming waters or changes in currents. If you've got fishing rights in a particular area and the fish goes, and then all of a sudden you've got quota for something that's not there and no quota for what's in there, which we're already seeing, that's going to have some significant political ramifications that are going to need unpicking, which is going to be terribly challenging.
There seems to be a lot of risks bundled into climate change then, really.
That's why I think it's the number one challenge.
Yeah.
That's why I think plastics is a challenge, but it's not number one. The climate change is significant, and it can have, and it's not just seafood it's going to impact, but it could have a significant impact.
Last sort of question, and then we'll get this all wrapped up. What country, if you can think of one or two, or just what country is getting it right with seafood?
Yeah, I think Iceland is a great example. They and it's probably easier for Iceland because they're on their own. They're an island. They don't have they're not managing their fisheries with lots of other countries, so they're able to be pretty unilateral in their management. But they have a good situation there. The stocks are well managed. They're in good state. No particular sort of threats to that. There are some discussions about the impact on the communities of the way that the quotas have coalesced into certain ownership, but that's not necessarily a fisheries management challenge. Norway, another example of good fisheries management, and they have bilateral discussions with the EU, so it can be done. So it's EU-Norway discussions, so they have good fisheries management. The USA has really good fisheries management. They have great regulations in place. There's some challenges. There's some rebuilding work going on. It's not perfect, but it's a great structure that they've got there. The system is good. So there's some good examples. But there's plenty of places where there's almost no management whatsoever, and that's where the challenges are.
I think one of the things we haven't really touched on is like pangasius and catfish and things like that. I've heard that especially in Vietnam it's pretty extreme I'm sure there's good places, but I've heard some pretty extreme stories about that. And but I'm not a big fan of river fish. Sort of glaze over it, to be honest. But I think we can end it there. I think we've spoken about a lot of topics, and I always thought it'd be an interesting one, Tom. But thank you for your time, and thank you for having me. I'm sure we'll talk again soon.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah,
Thank you. Pleasure.
I hope you all enjoyed listening to that episode with Dr. Tom Pickerell. I think that conversation was a good start, talking about fish and seafood. I fear we probably only scratched the surface on many topics, and we'll probably all have so many more questions. As always, if you could leave us a written review on Apple Podcasts, I'd be really grateful. And if you can share this with anybody in the food and hospitality industry, I'd really appreciate that too. Have a great day, everyone.